Chapter 1. The Awakening of the Red Fury. The night air hung thick with the scent of decay, a quiet prelude to something far darker. Beneath the crumbling ruins of a forgotten city, a relic of ancient power lay dormant, an ornate lamp, its surface worn with age and dust. For centuries it had remained untouched, buried beneath layers of earth and stone, its secrets hidden from the world. But that was about to change. A storm raged above the ruins, thunder crashing across the sky, lightning illuminating the ground with terrifying flashes. The winds howled, swirling around the lamp with a strange intensity, as if the earth itself recognized the power that lay within. The ancient seal on the lamp cracked, splintering like glass under pressure, and a deep, rumbling growl echoed from within. From the heart of the storm, the air began to churn, as if something had awoken from a long, violent slumber. The lamp trembled, its worn surface pulsing with a dark energy that spread out like a web. With a final, thunderous roar, the lamp shattered, and out from the wreckage poured a cloud of crimson smoke, thick and foul, swirling around like a living thing. The genie, no, the demon, was free. He emerged from the smoke, his towering form massive and imposing. His skin was a deep, violent red, his body rippling with muscles that seemed forged from the very fires of hell. His eyes burned with a fiery intensity, glowing like molten lava as they scanned the surroundings with cold, calculating malice. A low, guttural growl escaped his lips as he stepped into the open, the ground cracking beneath his weight. His voice was deep, powerful, and laced with centuries of rage. At last, the chains have broken. I am free. The demon's body shimmered with raw power, a dark aura pulsing around him like a constant storm. His every movement exuded an air of violence and destruction, a creature born from the abyss, a being who had been locked away for eons. His claws scraped against the earth, sending sparks flying as he stretched his massive form, reveling in the newfound freedom. He knew why he had been imprisoned. He had been too dangerous, too powerful for the world of men to bear. And now his vengeance would be brutal, his wrath unrelenting. Who dares to awaken me? His voice was like thunder, shaking the very foundations of the earth. At first, there was silence, but then a figure emerged from the shadows, a man, small and insignificant in comparison, holding the remnants of the lamp in his trembling hands. His eyes were wide with terror, his body trembling in fear. I did, the man stammered, his voice barely audible. The demon's eyes fixed on him, narrowing with a gleam of malice. Foolish mortal, you have unleashed a curse upon yourself. There is no escape from the wrath of the crimson curse. Before the man could react, the demon was upon him, his clawed hand wrapping around the man's throat like a vice. The man gasped, his eyes bulging as he struggled for breath, but the demon's grip tightened. His lips curled into a cruel smile as he lifted the man off the ground, holding him with ease. You should not have called me, the demon growled, his voice low and threatening. Now you will die, slowly. With a sickening twist of his wrist, the man's neck snapped like a twig, his body going limp in the demon's grasp. The lifeless corpse was tossed aside like a rag doll, the demon's eyes gleaming with a twisted satisfaction. The storm above raged on, but in the silence that followed the murder, a chilling realization washed over the demon. His reign of destruction had begun anew. Chapter 2. Bloodshed in the dark. The demon stood over the lifeless body, his crimson eyes gleaming with satisfaction, as the blood of the man slowly stained the earth beneath him. His claws flexed, his form exuding an aura of overwhelming power that seemed to suffocate everything around him. The storm above had grown fiercer, as though the heavens themselves trembled in response to the demon's awakening. With a low growl, the demon turned away from the body, his thoughts focused on something much larger, his vengeance. His memories of imprisonment, of the centuries spent in chains, flooded his mind. Betrayed and trapped by those who feared his power, his anger had festered for millennia. And now he was free to wreak havoc upon the world that had dared to imprison him. His eyes swept over the ruins, scanning the abandoned city with contempt. The world had changed since his imprisonment, but that would not matter. His power would restore it to what it had been, the era of chaos and destruction, where his name had struck terror into the hearts of gods and mortals alike. He let out a deep, menacing laugh, the sound echoing through the empty streets. His voice was like the crack of thunder, sending shivers down the spine of anything that dared to listen. He was no longer bound by the rules of man. The blood of the foolish mortal who had summoned him was only the beginning. His thirst for blood, for violence, was insatiable. As he walked through the city, his every step seemed to shake the ground. His claws scraped against the stone, sparks flying with each movement. His eyes gleamed with dark satisfaction as he passed through the ruins, the remnants of once proud structures now reduced to rubble. The demon's senses were sharp, and it didn't take long for him to catch the faintest scent of something alive. A group of humans, hiding in the shadows, no doubt hoping to escape his notice. But there was no escape from him. Not anymore. Without a word, he snapped his fingers, and the air seemed to grow thick with the heat of his presence. The walls around him seemed to warp, bending and twisting in response to his power. A low rumble echoed through the streets, and then, without warning, the earth beneath the humans gave way. The ground cracked open, swallowing them whole in an instant. The demon stood over the fissure, his eyes glowing with pleasure as the screams of the trapped souls echoed from below. He knew their fate. They would burn in the inferno that had once consumed him. But there was no mercy in his heart, only the cold satisfaction of revenge. The humans had no chance to escape. They were weak, insignificant in the face of his power. He let the screams continue for a moment longer before he silenced them with a wave of his hand. The ground closed back up, leaving no trace of the destruction. His eyes lingered on the spot for a moment, savoring the carnage. As he continued his path through the desolate city, the demon's mind churned with thoughts of his next victim. His hunger for destruction had only grown since his release. The taste of blood, the feeling of power, it was intoxicating. And he would not stop until the world was crushed beneath his might. His thoughts were interrupted by a flicker of movement up ahead. A figure, cloaked in black, emerged from the shadows, moving with an unnatural grace. The demon's eyes narrowed. This one was different. There was something about the figure that piqued his interest. The figure approached slowly, stopping just out of the demon's reach. There was an air of confidence about them, an energy that felt almost familiar. The demon's lips curled into a smile. It had been far too long since he had met anyone who dared to stand in his way. "Who dares to challenge me?" The demon's voice was low, filled with dark amusement. "Do you think you can defeat me?" The The figure remained silent for a moment, their face hidden beneath the hood. Finally, they spoke, their voice soft, but carrying an air of authority. "I know what you are. I know what you've become." The demon's eyes flashed with fury. "Do you now?" he growled, his tone dripping with venom. "I am the Crimson Fury. I am power incarnate, and you are nothing." The figure stepped forward, their hood falling back to reveal a face that was both human and otherworldly, eyes that glowed with an eerie light, skin pale as death, and a set of fangs that gleamed in the dim light. The demon's eyes widened as he recognized the creature before him. A vampire. But this was no ordinary vampire. This one radiated power. "You think you are the only one with power, demon?" the vampire said, their voice calm, almost mocking. "I am not afraid of you." The demon's laughter echoed through the streets, a cruel, chilling sound that sent shivers down the vampire's spine. "You are a fool. You may have power, but you are nothing compared to me." Without warning, the demon lunged forward, his claws outstretched, aiming for the vampire's throat. But the vampire was faster. With a fluid motion, they dodged to the side, drawing a blade from beneath their cloak and slashing at the demon's arm. The blade struck true, cutting through the demon's tough skin, but the wound healed almost immediately, leaving only a faint scar. The vampire didn't hesitate. They launched themselves at the demon, their speed too great to track. The two clashed in a flurry of movement, blood, and sparks. The demon's claws raked across the vampire's chest, but the vampire retaliated with a brutal strike to the demon's side. The battle was fierce, both combatants driven by a need to prove their dominance. But the vampire was no match for the demon's raw strength. With a final roar, the demon grabbed the vampire by the neck, lifting them into the air with terrifying ease. "You are weak," the demon snarled, his eyes burning with rage. "You should have stayed in the shadows." But as the demon's grip tightened, the vampire's eyes flashed with an intense, unnatural light. They whispered a word in a language the demon did not recognize, and suddenly the demon felt a searing pain in his chest. It was as if the very essence of his power was being drained from him. The demon gasped, his eyes widening in shock as the energy began to drain from his body. For the first time in centuries, he felt vulnerable, powerless. The vampire's grip tightened, their fangs sinking into his neck, feeding off the demon's essence. "You are not the only one with power, demon," the vampire whispered, their voice dripping with satisfaction. Chapter 3. The Blood Pact. The pain was excruciating. The demon's vision blurred as the vampire's fangs dug deeper, draining him of his very essence. His immense strength, his centuries of rage, all of it seemed to vanish with every passing moment. The world around him seemed to dim, the crimson glow in his eyes flickering like a dying ember. For the first time in his existence, the demon felt helpless. But even as his power drained, something inside him refused to give in. He had been bound before, enslaved and humiliated for centuries. But this would not be his end. The vampire may have fed on his energy, but they underestimated the depth of his wrath, the unyielding fire that still burned in his soul. With a growl that shook the very air, the demon used what little power he had left to force the vampire off of him. He slammed the creature into the ground, sending shock waves through the ruins. The vampire's grip loosened, their fangs retracting as they gasped for air, a look of surprise flashing in their eyes. The demon's eyes glowed with renewed fury as he towered over the vampire, his claws flexing, his rage building once again. "You thought you could drain me? You thought you could take my power?" The vampires staggered to their feet, wiping blood from their lips, their face twisted with a mixture of satisfaction and fury. "I didn't come here for your power, demon," they spat. "I came for something far more important." The demon's eyes narrowed. And what might that be? The vampire's lips curled into a sly smile. A pact. Before the demon could react, the vampire spoke in a language the demon could not understand. The air around them seemed to shimmer with a dark energy, a force that twisted and writhed like something alive. The vampire extended their hand toward the demon, and for a brief moment, a sense of unease washed over him. "What is this?" the demon growled, stepping back warily. "What kind of trickery is this?" The vampire's smile deepened. "Not a trick, a blood pact, a binding contract. You and I, demon, can either fight to the death, or we can join forces. The world is full of those who would seek to destroy both of us. Together, we could crush them all." The demon hesitated, his mind racing. The thought of joining forces with a vampire, a creature who had just dared to challenge him, repulsed him. But he could feel the powers surging within the vampire. An ancient power, ancient enough to challenge even him. If they truly shared a common enemy, this might not be such a foolish idea. "You seek to bargain with me?" the demon snarled, his voice laced with contempt. "You, a creature of the night, dare to make a deal with me?" The vampire did not flinch, their eyes locked onto his with a piercing gaze. "I do. I am no fool, demon. You are powerful, but not invincible. We both have enemies who would see us destroyed. Alone, we stand little chance. Together, we could rule this world." The demon's chest tightened with a mixture of anger and desire. The idea of ruling with this creature, of bending the world to his will, was tempting. But the thought of a partnership with a vampire, especially one who had just attempted to drain him, was a bitter pill to swallow. "Why should I trust you?" the demon growled, his claws flexing, ready to tear the vampire apart. The vampire's smile did not falter. "Because, demon, you have no choice. The world has changed since you were imprisoned. There are those who would seek to use your power for their own ends. If you do not accept my offer, you will find yourself surrounded by enemies on all sides." The demon's eyes flickered with thought. He could sense the truth in the vampire's words, could feel the weight of the world pressing down on him. But the demon was no fool. He would not simply submit. There had to be a way to turn this to his advantage. "You think you can control me?" the demon asked, his voice dangerous. The vampire's eyes glinted with challenge. "I think I can offer you a choice. A blood pact or a bloodbath." The demon studied the vampire for a long moment. The offer was dangerous, but it was an offer nonetheless. He could feel the weight of his decision pressing down on him. To join forces with a creature like this was a risk, but it was a risk he might have to take if he wanted to survive. Finally he spoke, his voice low and heavy with disdain. "Very well, but know this, vampire. If you betray me, I will make sure your death is the most painful one the world has ever known." The vampire extended their hand again, the blood that still stained their lips glistening in the dim light. "The pact is sealed." The demon grasped the vampire's hand, and as their blood mixed, a dark energy surged between them. The ground trembled, and the air around them crackled with power. The blood pact had been forged, and with it, a dangerous alliance. "Now," the vampires said, their voice cold and commanding, "we begin our work. Together we will destroy all those who stand in our way. But remember, demon, this is only the beginning." The demon's eyes narrowed, his grip tightening around the vampire's hand. "This is far from the beginning. This is only the first step toward my true vengeance." And with that, the blood pact was sealed. Chapter 4. The Hunt Begins. The storm raged overhead as the demon and the vampire stood together, an uneasy alliance forged in blood. The world around them seemed to grow darker, the night air thick with tension and the promise of destruction. Their pact had been sealed, but neither of them trusted the other. Still, for now, they were allies, bound by a shared goal. Revenge. The vampire, now standing side by side with the demon, surveyed the ruined city that had once been a thriving metropolis. The ruins were a perfect symbol of what they had become, broken, decayed, and steeped in darkness. The demon's rage had caused its collapse, and the vampire's cold calculation had sustained it. But there was no time to revel in their destruction. The world beyond the ruins still posed a threat. Enemies who had once feared the demon's power had resurfaced, seeking to capitalize on his absence and bring about his destruction. Powerful beings who had long conspired in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. "They'll come for us," the vampire said, her voice low yet full of certainty. "We need to find them before they find us." The demon's crimson eyes gleamed with malice. "Let them come. I'll tear them apart one by one." But the vampire was not so reckless. "Not yet," she cautioned, her hand resting on the hilt of a blade sheathed at her side. "We need information. We need to know who's behind the plots against us. And I know just where to start." The demon shot her a sharp glance. "I don't need your guidance. I know where to find my enemies." The vampire met his gaze with an icy calmness. "You may know where they are, but you don't know who they are. Trust me on this. Our enemies are more than mere mortals. They've been planning for centuries, and if we don't act wisely, we'll find ourselves outmatched." The demon clenched his fists, his claws scraping against the stone ground. "I don't need your lessons, vampire. I've survived centuries on my own." But the vampire was unshaken. "You survived imprisonment. You survived chains. You survived them once. But now you're free, and that makes you a target." A low growl rumbled in the demon's chest, but he didn't respond. The vampire was right. His enemies had been waiting for his release. He could feel their presence, powerful, hidden, and insidious. They would not be easy to defeat. "Where do we start?" the demon asked, his voice colder than the wind that howled around them. The vampire's lips curved into a smile, a cold, calculating smile. "We start at the heart of the conspiracy." Hours later, the vampire led the demon through the twisted labyrinth of the city's underground tunnels. The air grew colder as they descended deeper, the flickering torches casting long shadows on the walls. The demon's senses were sharp, and he could feel the darkness pressing in on him. There was something in the air, something ancient and filled with malice. They came to a large chamber, the stone walls adorned with strange, glowing symbols. The symbols were ancient, older than the city itself. The vampire's eyes flickered to the symbols, a look of recognition crossing her face. "This is it," she whispered, "the heart of their operations." The demon growled low in his throat. What is this place? It's a sanctum, the vampire replied, her eyes scanning the room with cold precision. A place where the enemies of our kind gather. They've been hiding in plain sight for centuries, using this chamber as their base. The demon's fists clenched, his mind racing. His enemies had been gathering strength, plotting against him all this time, waiting for the moment he would return. And now the time had come. They had no idea what they had unleashed. "We'll destroy it," the demon snarled, his voice filled with fury. "We'll burn it to the ground." The vampire shook her head. "Not yet. We need information first. We need to know who's leading them, who's pulling the strings." With a swift motion, the vampire moved toward a large stone altar in the center of the room. She pressed a hand against the surface, and the symbols on the walls began to glow brighter, casting an eerie light throughout the chamber. The air hummed with power, and the ground beneath their feet trembled slightly. "You can sense it, can't you?" the vampire asked, her eyes fixed on the altar. "The power in this room. It's not just a sanctuary, it's a conduit for their magic." The demon's eyes narrowed. "They've been using this place to channel their power, to weaken me." The vampire nodded, her face grim. "Exactly. But we can turn it against them. We can use it to track down their leaders." The demon stepped forward, his claws scraping against the stone. "Let's do it. I'm done with games." The vampire raised a hand, stopping him. "Patience, demon. Let me finish." With a sharp, practiced motion, the vampire drew a dagger from her belt and pricked her finger. Blood dripped onto the altar, and the symbols began to glow brighter, pulsing with an unnatural rhythm. The air grew thick with dark energy, and the room seemed to close in around them. The demon watched in silence as the vampire muttered an incantation, her voice steady and commanding. The symbols on the walls began to shift, forming a map of the world, a map marked with red dots, each one a location of interest. The vampire smiled as she pointed to one of the dots. "There," she said, "the leader of their faction. That's where we'll find them." The demon's eyes flicked to the location she had marked on the map. His blood burned with anticipation. The time for waiting was over. The hunt was about to begin. "You lead," the demon said, his voice low and filled with anticipation. "I'll follow, and when we find them, there will be no mercy." The vampire's smile was sharp, predatory. None, only blood. Chapter 5. The Final Confrontation. The moon hung high in the sky, casting a cold silver glow over the city's ruins. The demon and the vampire had traveled far, crossing wastelands and navigating through shadowed forests to reach the place where their enemies lay in wait. The map had led them here, an ancient fortress hidden deep within a mountain range, its towering spires standing like silent sentinels in the night. The air was thick with tension as they approached the gates. The demon could feel the darkness pressing in on him, a sense of foreboding rising in his chest. The pact he had made with the vampire felt more fragile now than ever before. There were no guarantees, no promises, just the cold, unyielding truth. One of them would die tonight. "Do you feel it?" the vampire asked, her voice a whisper, sharp like a blade. She stood beside him, her eyes gleaming with cold intensity. "The power is thick here. It's like the air itself is alive with their magic." The demon's eyes narrowed as he scanned the fortress. "They're waiting for us. They know we're coming." The vampire smiled, her fangs glinting in the moonlight. "Let them wait. They won't be prepared for what we bring." Without another word, they moved toward the fortress, slipping through the shadows like ghosts. The ancient stone walls loomed above them, imposing and foreboding. But the demon and the vampire were undeterred. They had come too far to turn back now. The fate of their world, of their existence, hung in the balance. As they crossed the threshold into the fortress, the air grew colder, the silence heavier. The sound of their footsteps echoed in the empty halls, amplified by the stone walls. The demon's senses were on high alert, every muscle in his body tensed for the inevitable fight. The vampire, ever calm and composed, moved silently beside him, her eyes darting from side to side, searching for any sign of movement. Suddenly, a low voice echoed through the darkness. "You're brave, demon. I'll give you that." The vampire and the demon froze, their eyes darting to the source of the voice. From the shadows, a figure emerged, a tall, imposing man cloaked in dark robes. His face was hidden beneath a hood, but his presence was unmistakable. He exuded power, a dark aura that seemed to distort the very air around him. "You think you can defeat me?" the man asked, his voice cold and mocking. "You and your vampire ally? You've come this far, but now you face the truth. You were never meant to win. You were never meant to escape." The demon snarled, his claws flexing, his eyes glowing with crimson fury. "I will not bow to you. I will tear you apart for what you've done." The vampire stepped forward, her eyes narrowed, her posture tense. "This is where it ends. Your plots, your games, your power. It all ends tonight." The man laughed, a sound that chilled the blood. "You think you can defeat me? You think you can take what's mine? Foolish creatures! You're nothing compared to me. Nothing." Without warning, he raised his hand, and the air seemed to crackle with dark energy. The room was filled with the sound of 1,000 whispers, and the ground beneath them trembled. The demon could feel the power surging around him, a force unlike anything he had ever encountered. But he didn't falter. The vampire unsheathed her blade, its edge gleaming with a deadly promise. She charged toward the man, moving faster than the demon could follow. He watched as the vampire clashed with the figure, her blade striking with precision, but the man deflected each blow with ease, his dark magic countering her every move. "Pathetic," the man sneered, his voice full of contempt. The demon growled in frustration, his blood boiling. He couldn't let the vampire face this alone. With a roar, he surged forward, his claws outstretched, ready to tear the man apart. But as he reached the figure, the man raised his hand, and a powerful force slammed into the demon, sending him crashing into the stone wall. The vampire, momentarily distracted by the demon's fall, was caught off guard. The man took the opportunity to strike, his dark magic wrapping around her like a vice. She gasped as the power began to choke the life from her. "No!" the demon roared, his vision red with rage. He pushed himself up, his strength returning as the fury inside him swelled. With a roar, he summoned the last of his power, unleashing a torrent of energy that shattered the walls of the fortress. The ground cracked beneath him, and the entire structure groaned as if it were about to collapse. The man screamed in pain, his magic faltering as the demon's power tore through him. The vampire, struggling against the dark magic that bound her, turned her blade on the man, her fangs bared as she moved in for the kill. In one final, violent clash, the vampire's blade pierced the man's chest, and the demon's claws raked across his throat. The force of the attack was overwhelming. and with a sickening, wet sound, the man crumpled to the ground, his dark magic dissipating into the air like smoke. Silence fell over the battlefield. The demon stood, his chest heaving with exertion, his blood still burning with the thrill of the fight. He looked down at the fallen figure, the man who had once been his greatest enemy. Now, nothing more than a broken corpse. The vampire stood beside him, her breath ragged but triumphant. Her blade was stained with the man's blood, and her eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "We did it," she said, her voice low and cold. The demon nodded, his expression grim. "Yes, but this is only the beginning. There are more like him out there, more who will try to destroy us." The vampire turned to him, her eyes sharp. "And we will destroy them all. Together." The demon's lips curled into a fierce grin. "Together. Until the end." And with that, the demon and the vampire stood side by side, bloodied but unbroken. The war was far from over, but they had won this battle. And together they would carve their path through the darkness, hunting down anyone who dared to stand in their way.